have a number of children that have had self-harm issues, depression, suicidal ideations, all because they are not getting the right support from their school, and it's not the school's fault. So we need earlier identification, we need earlier diagnosis in order to get the right support in place. The education, the HCP process is a nightmare for parents to navigate, and there's no other word to really describe it.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this launch. It's an important launch of Curia's work on the Dyslexia Commission. This is a key issue for many of us who've been involved in education over the last few decades, and so it's really good to have this quality report before us now. I'm Neil Carmichael. I used to be chair at one time of the House of Commons Education Select Committee, and now I am Chief Executive of UCEC, which is an organisation delivering high quality education across China and Asia. And I'm also chair of the Association of Dental Groups, which looks into obviously dentistry and supports the delivery of dentistry across this country. But I don't want any questions about dentistry today. We want to focus very much on education and dyslexia. Thank you all very much for contributing to it. I know that people in this room have done so, and people on the video screen have done so. It really matters when people bring their expertise, their commitment, and their skills to reports like this. And as I used to say when I was chair of the Select Committee, evidence is crucial. And I've looked through the report, and there's evidence there. Evidence is really necessary when you're making decisions about the future, intending to influence policy and making sure that what you're recommending is embedded. The Commission's focused on a broad range of factors spanning from early years all the way through to adult age. This is really critical because people don't stop when they're 18. They don't stop at a certain point. They are always ready to do something, and they might need help, and they should have that help if it's necessary. So that linear approach is absolutely critical. I'm glad that's embedded here. The report's now been launched. It's on the website, Curia's website, and the publication link has been added to the chat. So that's good news. Our audience, as I've said, contains former panelists, audience members from the Dyslexia Commission, and the directors and heads of industry, people involved in this at every single level. So that is fantastic. How are we going to work today? Well, we're going to have two sessions. The first session is going to be really from experts in leading in the field of assistive technology, AT, for those of you who like acronyms. And this is obviously focused for education skills and training in the fields of employment that is relevant. We've got three panelists for this purpose. Julie Clouter, Head of Education Scanning Pens, Succeed with this Dyslexia Ambassador. Not quite sure what I'm reading out there, but good. That's great. Andy Salmon, who's Director and CEO of Linkalot, and Matthew Poole, to my left, Director of Grants and Investment Youth Futures. So those are the three people who will be in the first panel. No, they're the second panel, aren't they? Yeah, sorry about that. The first panel is Helen Ross, keynote speaker. She's going to be summarising the report and its recommendations. She has to leave, I think, which that's Michelle. Sorry. And she's going to, so you are going to be speaking about the process development of the report via research and inquiry, which is really important. That's what I've been emphasising. Michelle Catterson is also going to be talking, and David will be in action as well. Okay, so that's the lineup. So first of all, can I invite you, Helen, to do your 10 minutes?
Yes, so you can. Thank you. Hi everybody. I don't really know where to look. I'm just gonna. Is it alright if I look at the laptop? So I've got something to focus on so I don't look at the wall because it's scary. So I have been really lucky to be part of like various different bits of the inquiry, and my sort of role here is to summarise the aims and the bits and bobs that have contributed to the final report. The Curia Commission was actually commissioned by Curia alongside the BDA with Matt Hancock at the time as well. And it was really about discussing practical and pragmatic ways that barriers could be reduced so that people with dyslexia can flourish. They very actively drew on a hugely broad range of people, some with lived experience of dyslexia, some with academic experience, some working in the field, so that they could contribute from a really broad range of platforms and just expertise. And there were 10 inquiry sessions that took place over these 4 days, and it was broken into 4 kind of areas, and they were reducing inequalities, SEND review and the school's white paper, and coordination of care, moving on to working age adults. Now, I read through the report, not as early as I would have liked to have done, but hey ho, I am human. And what I really noticed is there's such, you can't for me separate that they're not disaggregatable areas. But I think they did need discussing altogether because they're interspersed, but they are separate. And for me, so much comes back to education. When I was looking through the reducing inequalities element, the teacher training and the school's white paper, all within these 3 sessions that took place in the reducing inequalities bit, training was key. Making sure of consistency and provision was key. Ensuring that current policy frameworks are actually listened to and adhered to was key. And what actually was incredibly, well, quite poignant actually, given the mess that COVID has left everybody in, was when looking at the white paper element and the SEND review, how much emphasis is being put on the importance of mental health provision being met. But when you talk to people on the ground, queues for CAMS, support, waiting lists, they are longer than your arm. So there is so much to think about, and so much that then kind of connects to the coordination of care element of it, where the types of therapy need to have awareness, where things like clear definition, delineated roles of GPs, delineated roles of different elements of the kind of web there to support children, they need to be clearly defined, but also they need to talk to one another. We want to put the care back into education, health and care plan. That was something that really struck me. And it strikes me from having been a Senko as well. There's such disparate systems and they just don't seem to talk properly, despite on paper, policy, guidelines all stipulating that it should. And I think as part of really holistic provision then comes in technology, which again is associated with things like training, education, initial teacher training, ongoing teacher training. And then who pays for the technology? So we link back to the SEND reviews, we link back to accountancy, accountancy because of funding, but accountability and transparency, who pays for it? Because one thing that again struck me reading through the report is that parents who can foot the bill, but not every parent can. What do these children, young people, adults who fall through these gaps? They go somewhere and it's not always a very nice journey that they end up taking. So I think for me, what really struck me was there's a kind of bottom approach that needs to happen within education. But then as you come around, there's adults in the workplace now who are wobbling, who are just having some really difficult times. And within the criminal justice system, I'm aware of some of the work of Trustee and scanning pens, Julia sitting next to me on my right. The work they do is incredibly important because once you've got into a bit of a pickle, as a euphemism, or once you're an adult, kind of learning to read not everybody's got headspace for it. So again, this is where technology can be so key. And I think I had a look through all the recommendations. I'm not going to say them individually because I think that's just reading off a PowerPoint and reading off. We don't need to do that. You can read the report, but I looked at them kind of with my qualitative sociologist head, because that's my PhD, and awareness and consistency, they were the themes that ran through, and that was supported by tech. And if you've got awareness, people can talk about things. People don't find that they are embarrassed if you've got people that are in a position to talk about things and are confident and like a certain person here, don't mind if they make a bit of a wally out themselves, it starts to be the thin end of a wedge where people who are more self-conscious, who may have more to lose, you may just not be as confident for umpteen different reasons. If we can start modelling and talking about dyslexia and saying, actually, no, I hate reading, it's a pain, but it's okay not to like reading. As I said to my PE teacher at the dyslexia show on Friday, I didn't like hockey, but I ride my bike and play netball. There are different things, different skills we all like and enjoy. We might need to know how to read, but we don't have to enjoy it. There are ways to get around reading if it's wobbly. And for me, education, making sure that we train teachers, equip teachers in how to use technology, in how to use diverse teaching methods. And that starts at the day one you walk into teacher training college, and it needs to continue until you draw your pension or until you move fields. It is so important. And that will set people up in general, so that as adults, as they work their way through, we've made that space for dyslexia to be okay, for literacy ones to be okay, and people to advocate for themselves. I will stop.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Catterson. I am head teacher of Moonhall School in Reigate, and I am also chair of the board at the British Dyslexia Association. Yes, unfortunately, I do have another commitment this afternoon. It's the last day of term for many schools in the UK, and I've got to hot foot it to school assembly. I've got 90 parents turning up, so my apologies that I won't be here for the question section. I also chaired one of the inquiry sessions on working age adults, and being a head teacher, my day-to-day job is not working with many adults with dyslexia, although I will say we have a number of neurodiverse members of staff here at our school, and we have to make necessary accommodations, and we want to make necessary accommodations to make sure that they can be successful in the place of work here. And I actually have ex-pupils that are now employed as members of staff here at the school. All pupils at Moonhall must have a diagnosis of dyslexia. Many of them have other needs as well. They have co-occurring difficulties, as you might expect with a child with dyslexia. 55% of our pupils here at the school have an educational healthcare plan, and we work with 10 different local authorities. We do a huge amount of community partnership working because we feel it's exceptionally important. I absolutely recognise that not every child can come to a school like this. Not every child has the benefits of having their needs met within the classroom, and that is really sad, and it's very unfortunate, and I hear it on a daily basis from parents that want to send their children to a specialist school, whether that's Moonhall or another school, or even reach out to us in order to ask for advice and guidance on what they should be asking their child's current school in terms of support. So I'm aware that the system in many ways is broken and does not support families and those children with SEN the way that it should. In terms of teacher training, obviously being in a school and being a head teacher, we've had many staff that have gone through teacher training, and I just feel so frustrated and disappointed. It is such a missed opportunity. We have thousands of teachers in the UK that are qualifying every single year with a postgraduate certificate in education, yet the module on SEN is not mandatory for all of these teachers. Now, if every single person who was being trained as a teacher took a module in SEN, not just dyslexia, but other neurodiversities as well, the impact on every single school in the UK would be huge. It would be so positive. And I really would sort of reach out to ministers and those working with initial teacher training facilities and providers to try and include this as part of your education of teachers. We work with local education providers, and they are welcome to come to our school, and they can come for the day and they can observe lessons, observe our methods, look at how our resources are different and the way that we deliver things differently. But that's it. One day is not really enough. And that's not just coming from us as a school, a specialist school, that's coming from the students. They want more. And this has been commented on for many, many years. And in my role at the British Dyslexia Association, I hear this time and time again. The Rose Report in 2009 called for specialist teachers in every single school in the UK, called for a change to teacher training providers. And all these years later, we are still sadly no further forward with educating all these professionals that are going to be working with our pupils. I think we have teachers that are absolutely willing, that desperately want to help the children within their class. I may teach in an independent school now. I've not always taught in an independent school, and I've also been a state school governor as well. I know financially how difficult it is to be able to afford courses and training and even time for teachers to be able to do this. There are wonderful courses out there, and there are wonderful opportunities out there, and there are expertise within other schools as well. So I think even the opportunity for teachers to be able to visit other schools where there is that level of expertise would also be welcomed. I think teachers, and I've mentioned how willing they are and how much they want to help. I think teaching's a vocation. We go into this profession because we want to make a difference. We want to have a positive impact on a child's life. We want to be able to help them, but we need the skills and we need the resources. We need to be taught how to differentiate resources. What does a dyslexia-friendly classroom look like? How can teachers tailor their resources that they have already to make that classroom more inclusive? Simple help sheets, guidance, advice would be warmly welcomed by many, many, many schools. I have worked with so many wonderful professionals in the independent and state sector, many wonderful Senkos. My children go to state school, and I think there are so many amazing professionals out there that want to make a difference. And it's just about sharing that expertise and being able to help those individuals that are keen to help the pupils in their classes. I think often as well, I hear when I receive documentation, I hear from parents, I hear from families about the difficulties, not only in getting the support, but in terms of a diagnosis. In the area where my school is, the local authority wait for an educational psychologist through the local authority is over 12 months. So for a diagnosis in dyslexia, which is often the first point of contact in order to get the right level of support, a child will be waiting over 12 months. Now, the impact on that child in that 12-month period, where the parents recognise that there are some difficulties, that maybe they're not at the same level of their peers, has a hugely detrimental impact to that child. They start to have low self-esteem, they are school refusers, mental health issues start to kick in. We have a number of children that have had self-harm issues, depression, suicidal ideations, all because they are not getting the right support from their school, and it's not the school's fault. So we need earlier identification, we need earlier diagnosis in order to get the right support in place. The education, the HCP process is a nightmare for parents to navigate, and there's no other word to really describe it. The amount of paperwork that has to be provided is enormous. In the local authority area that I'm in at the moment, 2/3 of the SEN budget has been spent on tribunal cases, so taking the local authority to court to try and get the right support in place. And in 90% of those cases that go to tribunal, they are found in favour of the family taking the council to court. That is a waste of public funds. That money, that SEN budget, which is already restricted, which is already not enough, is being spent on expensive barristers' legal cases, and it is simply not good enough. We need to be able to promote independence in our young people, and the new SEND review hopefully will be able to do that. We need to be looking at alternative forms of accessing the lessons. We need to be able to look at assistive technology and how that can be used as well. With assistive technology, there is so much out there. There's a lot of free resources that are accessible, but we need teachers to feel empowered on how to deliver that assistive technology. I know myself as a teacher, I've been a teacher over 20 years. If I'm not confident in something, I am far more likely to put it to the side and not use it. We need to make sure that teachers are being taught coached and have a point of contact when there is new assistive technology out there. We want to promote individuals to be entirely independent. We know that they are not always going to be able to rely on another adult to help them to access the support that they are used to in school. And assistive technology, and perhaps even the use of AI, is really, really beneficial to those individuals in helping them to be successful. I could go on and on and on. There's so much, and I'm very passionate about making sure that every child has an access to education that they are absolutely entitled to. But I'm going to pass over, if that's okay, so that I don't go over my 10 minutes. And I will also sign off from the call, and apologies if anybody wanted to ask me further questions. You can reach out to me at Moonhall School in Reigate if anybody's got further questions on my role as head teacher, or even in my role as chair of the British Dyslexia Association. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Michelle. I hope it was an excellent presentation, full of passion as well. And I'm sure that Moonhall School is obviously well led. So thank you very much indeed for all of that. And you've drawn our attention to some of the key issues. Diagnosis is an obvious one. And you're right too about all schools needing appropriate expertise. I took the Education Select Committee to Finland, where I saw that actually happening, and it works. So it's something that we should be thinking about here. So thank you very much indeed. I hope you've not detained for your appointment. Now, next in this session is David Williams, who is Director of Inclusion at Park Academies Trust, and he is in position before his camera now.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think probably the best place for me to start is really to outline my dyslexia journey. I was a child at 12, 13 years old who was basically illiterate, unable to read, predicted to fail all of my GCSEs. I did actually learn to read when I was 14. I was very lucky time-wise, because it meant that I passed my GCSEs and then passed A-levels and got a degree, and I have a research degree from Oxford. But if it had been 2 years later, none of that would have happened, and that's the truth of it. I went and worked in industry for a period of time, and then, having hated school, decided I was going to become a teacher. Went into teaching, worked as a special educational needs coordinator in a variety of schools, both mainstream and specialist provision. And I currently work for the Park Academies Trust as their Director of Inclusion. We're an all-through trust, so we've got everything from nursery to post-16, both specialist provision and mainstream provision. So that's my background. Alongside that journey, I also work quite closely with the Dyslexia Association from 2024, to 2004 till 2020, really. I was a trustee for 10 years and previously was chair of the board as well. In terms of where it's going at the moment, for the first time really in the last 10 years, I actually feel very positive about the momentum and the pace that's picking up around special educational needs in general. I think that the inquiry that's been going on this year actually sums up an awful lot of the issues that school teachers are having and that SENCOs are having, and more importantly, parents and children are having. And I think that the plan that the DfE released earlier this month, following the Green Paper, has got huge positives in it. And actually, I look to the future and hope that some of those things that we thought were going to be addressed in 2014 with the SEND reforms, I hope that they're going to be addressed moving forwards now. What do I mean by that? Well, the plan really, it's looking at a few different areas. I think one of the most important is the linking of alternative provision and specialist provision, and them coming under the same group. That's because within AP, alternative provision across the country, about 82% of the children who are attending those sites have got special educational needs of some description. And in essence, it's been special education on the cheap across the country. And those have been missed. They've been a hidden group of young people, often the most vulnerable, and often those who are struggling with reading or literacy. And actually bringing AP into the centre and front from an education point of view, I think is going to be hugely positive for all children with special needs. I also think that the ideas and the thoughts around linking the integrated care system and education and Helen mentioned it or touched on it. I think that's going to actually make a big difference as well, because we hold information within education that's hugely useful to health, particularly around well-being, around safeguarding, around supporting pupils. We're able to predict very early when things are starting to go wrong, and that's hugely useful to the our health colleagues, but also they hold information which would be very useful to us. So parents would start to raise concerns with GPs predominantly, but also paediatricians at quite early ages. And I think actually bringing those two systems together has got the potential to really change the situation across the country. The other thing that the plan is looking at is having 3 different tiers of intervention for alternative provision. And the idea behind this is that previously AP is basically children go to AP and they stay there predominantly for the rest of their education career. Very, very few people return back into mainstream classrooms. There's a number of reasons for that, and mainly it's around confidence, and it's around students feeling that they need that level of support and that they've sometimes even been rejected from their home schools. The idea moving forwards is that the tier 1 will be lots of intervention in the schools, and that mirrors actually what's been said in this piece of work around dyslexia. So the two things are coming together beautifully. But the tier 2 is where I'm really interested, and that's short-term placements for targeted periods of time for young people, where they stay in their home schools for most of the week and they do short-term placements. Now that means that they're not feeling rejected. It means that they continue to feel supported. It means that we can upskill the teaching staff from specialist teachers, with them working much more closely together rather than in silos. And that really does mirror an awful lot of what's been said around teacher training, but it's the next stage. So the initial teacher training is absolutely critical. It's really important. We've been lobbying for it for years and years and years. But actually that next step of continued professional development by linking those really, really skilled practitioners with mainstream classroom teachers going in, doing interventions in the classroom, say this really works, or have you thought about doing this, or can I team teach a lesson with you, or can we work through that together and have another look? I think that continued professional development will make a big, big difference across the country. In terms of teacher development, there's a number of routes into that now. So it's not just around going to university, getting a PGC in and teaching. So there's teaching assistants to teacher programs, where teaching assistants without degrees are able to get qualified on the job and become teachers. And we've got a number of teachers in our trust who have followed those programs. And actually what you get is somebody who really understands special educational needs, because they've worked as a TA day to day in the classroom, supporting individual children or small groups of children. They really do have a very different approach to it. And that's becoming more and more popular, particularly with the cost crisis at the moment, because it means that people can train as teachers alongside a job and alongside a salary. So I'm really interested in what that initial teacher training looks like, and how academy trusts and schools can be involved in that as well. In terms of well-being and academic achievement, I think that these are intrinsically linked. If a child has got low self-confidence, or they've got low well-being, or they don't believe they can do it, or they don't believe that the teacher or their parent believes they can do it, I don't think they're going to do it. And actually, I think we need to get that right. And the paper touches on this in quite a few different areas. It's about confidence. It's about building young people's self-esteem, really, and looking at how we can do things slightly differently. One of the fundamental differences between standalone schools and academy trusts, and whatever your viewpoint is, and I've worked in both and can see the merits of both, but the fundamental advantage of schools joining together and collaborating and sharing resource is that they can put provisions into place which a standalone school wouldn't be able to afford. So within our trust, for example, we've got a mental health continuum, which we've borrowed from the Canadian military, because we recognise that actually mental health comes and goes. You don't have good mental health or poor mental health. It can change by the hour. It can change by quicker than that, even 15 minutes. So and as it goes up and down, it's learning the resilience and the ways to cope with that actually makes a difference. And the other thing that we do is we've opened up an area called School Solutions, and that really does put together tailored, bespoke curriculum and short-term interventions and packages for children in their schools where they're really struggling. And it means that we can go out, like I was saying earlier about the potential for AP moving forwards. It means that we can go out and very highly trained specialist staff can work with general teachers around issues in a non-threatening way, because they're all part of the same organisation. So both of those two things fill me with quite a lot of, I suppose, hope for the future, really. In terms of adaptive and assistive technology, we've talked for years about differentiation, and we're moving away from that phrase into adaptive learning and adaptive resources for children. And I think it's a better description because it's not about doing something completely different. For me, it's about making the curriculum accessible for young people. And I think if we link that with assistive technology and the use of assistive technology, we can actually help children to learn strategies and learn ways that they will be able to use for the rest of their lives. It's not about just putting an adult with them and getting them through school and getting them GCSEs. For me, it's about getting them ready for early adulthood and adulthood and getting them ready for the workplace and them learning strategies that they can use themselves. Because actually we're trying to make people independent. We're trying to give them the skills, the resources that they need to move forward with the rest of their lives. I could talk all day, but I'm going to stop there, and I'm very happy to take any questions. If anybody after this would like to come and talk to me, they're more than welcome. Thank you.
David, thank you very much indeed for your contribution. As the other two did, you've made some interesting points, in particular focusing on the training element of this, which is really critical, and actually the support for people moving into employment. So really good stuff, and I hope we'll have some good dialogue about that in due course. Now, we've got three sort of prepared questions. I don't think they're in the room, so to speak, so I'm going to sort of read these questions out. And you, David, and you, Helen, are going to be answering them. And then we're going to have a dialogue, because I see there's a couple of people on the chat box who have raised some issues which I think can be expanded. So first of all, we've got Kisha Adair-Swarby, radio presenter at Empowering Dynamics. And she's really worrying about the problem, the big problem of the marginalisation of ethnic communities in mainstream SEND conversation, and how recommendations, discussions, and so forth. How can all of that actually address that particular problem? Because it is a worry, isn't it, that we have this difficulty with recognising that all ethnic groups have got to have their fair share.
I'm going to throw a cat among the pigeons. I don't think it does address it properly.
Yeah.
I think, and I speak as a white woman who's had a very, very privileged. I grew up in Royal Leamington Spa. I have had a very nice life, and I am privileged. My parents have money. Not everybody has that, so I can't speak from a perspective of somebody who's had a difficult time from a different racial group. But I think it doesn't address it. I think voices are not listened to. No, voices aren't amplified. And I think when you think about Black boys, I remember when I was doing my PhD, I read a paper by two brothers. They were Black lads, and they were so dyslexic, and I can't remember who wrote it, but I could see the paper with all my notes on it. And their journey was just, traumatic. Mm. But they said nobody listened to them, and they were just like, they were sort of pigeonholed as disruptive, naughty boys. And it happens to white boys, but I understand that it's a very different journey for a Black person. I can't speak to that, but it just broke my heart. And I can't see the structures, the kind of ingrained thought processes behind political structures and social structures aren't going to change like that. And I think we need to listen, and actively, when somebody from a different racial group or a different minority group tells me as a white majority person in my position, we need to jolly well listen and act on what they're saying, not just go, oh, it'll be fine. Do something about what people are saying for me. I don't know what they were saying.
Well, we're going to find out in a minute, because we're going to ask him. Helen's basically said not enough is done to deal with this particular concern. David, what do you think, and what do you think should be done?
Yeah, so I agree entirely with everything that she's just said. I think what we try to do is we try to get our young people's voice heard clear and centre. So we have a programme which we call Young Inspectors, just because it makes sense to everybody. And what we do is we select a group of children from, and it's balanced group, but from different minorities. So not just different racial groups, but also children who've been in the care sector or are in the care sector, children with disabilities. And we do it a few times a year. And what we do is we get them together and we train them in how to look at a specific thing. So that might be early intervention, or it might be a reading scheme, or it might be how children are supported in the classroom, or safe spaces in the school. We then take them in a day around 5 or 6 of our schools in our trust, and they will spend an hour or so looking at each individual thing that they're being asked to inspect. So very specific. They're trained to do it, and what we found is that the young people come up with views that we hadn't thought of as adults in the main. So we walk in and out of these schools all day, every day. Some of us are inspectors, some of us have trained as inspectors, and yet we miss things that the young people notice, and their views differ depending on their backgrounds. And I don't think there's a single child's view that we haven't taken into account and put in their recommendations, and we've been doing this for about 3 years now across our trust. So my answer to it would be to get proper engagement with the young people. The next step would be to try and get proper engagement with the parents as well. The young people are easier because they're physically on site.
Thanks, David. Thank you very much. Moving on to Sarah Whaley-Huggins' question. She's a councillor from Stratford District Council to be exact. How do we support neurodiverse persons transitioning from full-time employment into education, into further education or employment? Helen.
Cool. Just a little hello to the Shire. I grew up in Lamington, so the next districts along. I'm thinking about this quite a lot. I don't know a lot about universal design of the curriculum, and it's something over the next few weeks that's on my hit list to read about. But I think where the principle around the idea of kind of making delivery of schooling such that you don't need to bother having to ask for adjustments because you're empowered to make those adjustments. It's something that we start at the year dot and continue that all the way up. Transition doesn't hit people in the face so much. And if, as part of that universal curricular delivery and design, kids have things like the right tech, if they want to use buff paper, they can. If they want to talk through their exams, they can. So if they're equipped right from reception, and we're doing that in Wiltshire, aren't we? You've got some awesome stuff happening in Wiltshire now with scanning pens. Like, if they're equipped, if teachers are equipped, they know how to use tech, they know how to do things differently to support those children. I think it won't be such a big wallop in the face. And because it is, just A-level was where I spent hours crying in my maths lessons because I couldn't read the questions. And it's these periods of transition that are horrible. So if everyone sings from the same song sheet, if provision is consistent, if actual policies are actually listened to and implemented properly, then it shouldn't be such a big culture clash. Now on the ground, we're not there yet. So I would say discussion, talk to the young people, get a proper meeting, whether it's physical or online, between kids, settings, their grown-ups, their carers, their responsible adults, and talk about what they need at each period of transition, not just school to college, but key stage 2 to 3, 3 to 4. And that for me is a dialogue for now, and then proper resourcing. Thank you,
Helen. That's a very interesting answer. David, you got anything to add?
No, not really. I was about to say exactly what Helen just said, which is it's transition at every stage that makes the difference. And as I said previously, if you can get assistive technology to be the normal way of working, actually, it's not just about going to university or college, it's also about going into the workplace. And that should be our end goal for all educationists, really. It's allowing our young people to have aspirations and to meet those aspirations.
Yeah, you're both absolutely right. And I think that certainly here in the room, there's a lot of nodding heads. So that's correct. The third question that we've been given is from Rachel Gelder, who's a dyslexia specialist teacher. Which one?
That's all right. No, I suppose my question links in very much to what David and Michelle were saying about ensuring that new teachers are trained effectively in SEND issues, because until we do that, we're never going to have a truly inclusive classroom. So I suppose my question is, what explicit changes are there to be made around training for teachers, so that I know we need to upskill the staff we've already got, but new teachers coming through, how can we do it from there and follow it through?
So I think the key here really is making SEND training explicit within all teacher training programs. For many years, I've tried to get this into place. I've been and spoken to Chair's Ofsted 10 years ago around this. And actually, if we can get it onto the inspection regime for the providers, that's the quickest way to ensure that it will actually happen. But it needs to not be tokenistic. It needs, SEND makes up more than 20% of the population. It should make up at least 20% of the initial teacher training courses and at least 20% of all practice in the schools, in my opinion. If you can teach effectively any child with SEND in a mainstream school, or most children with SEND in a mainstream school, then you will be a very, very strong teacher for all children. That's the bit that's the real message. Actually, dyslexia teaching, not just dyslexia teaching, teaching of children for SEND supports all children, because it's clear, it's concise, it's chunked where it's needed to, it's at the right pace, it's checking understanding, and actually that is just good teaching. So when people are talking about quality first teaching, we shouldn't be teaching to the bottom and we shouldn't be teaching to the middle. We should be teaching to the top, and we should be adapting and making the top accessible for the children who are struggling. And that's a real culture shift. That's my opinion.
Julie, would you like that?
I've taken a lot of the words out of my mouth, but I also think there's another driver that we can use, and I might touch on it when I talk a little bit later on, and that's around assessment agencies. So I'm thinking particularly about primary assessment. And if a teacher is taking a student through the assessment for SATs, and there is a lack of clarity about the kind of accommodations that are available for the SATs, they're never going to actually extend that practice and feel confident about extending that practice into their teaching and into their classrooms. And so there has to be a dialogue with the assessment agents. I think JCQ do it very well, because they talk about lots of different forms of assistive tech, but less good at primary. And I think we've got to look at, if we want to make some effective change, then we've got to work out who the people are that we need to get around in the room to change the assessment criteria.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I wrote in 20-something lockdown year, 2020, I got a call from the Office for Science and Tech, and I wrote a review about supporting kids with specific learning difficulties. And one of my recommendations was exactly what David said. Like, there was a report in 2018 around provision for special needs, the frameworks for teaching SEN stuff in universities and teacher training, and it was just a bit pat. There was such inconsistency. And reflecting what David said, actually, the report from Ofsted found that the best delivery, when it was good, was delivered in schools. So it's just so inconsistent. It makes my blood boil, and it's not rocket science to sort. It's really not. It doesn't need to be a battle. Rah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the answers to those three submitted questions, and many apologies for but thank you very much for the question. We've had some questions also on the chat box, and we've got about 10 minutes to sort of throw the floor open, so to speak, to everybody who'd like to develop some points. Lynn Brown, for example, has been talking about alternative provision, and I don't know if she wants to expand that point, but I will ask this question on her behalf right now, and she can ask another if she wishes. Do you think that this is an issue going forward which is going to get more problematic? Helen?
I didn't quite understand.
Alternative provision, because obviously, you know, that's something which people need to define what it is, and we've done it on the chat box. But where do we think we should be treating alternative provision?
I struggle with this because, like, inclusion for me doesn't mean every child in the same room. For some children, mainstream classroom is brutal. It is utterly brutal. I assessed a kid on Monday, Tuesday this week on just a lovely little lad, but autistic, and mainstream was destroying him. Now he needs a little setting with a small classroom where he can just exist and not get essentially overload. Mainstream for him is not inclusive. For most kids with dyslexia, given the right tech, teaching strategies, if dyslexia is the main driving force of their needs, they will probably be okay, and they will probably be all right to spend most of their time in mainstream classroom. So I think alternative provision absolutely needs to exist. It needs to talk to mainstream provision. They need to sit around a table or a Zoom call. Of course they do. But I think for me, there should be no one size fits all. And inclusion for me needs to reflect that for some children, mainstream gives them trauma. And I think we must keep that in mind as well as having everybody in the classroom.
So sort of backstop position in a sense.
Maybe, well, just that for some kids they need alternative provision, whether it's little classes, whether it's particular teaching, and for some kids they will be okay, but there needs to be flexibility in it.
Yeah, David.
This is a group of students that for the last 20 years have been hidden largely. And I think what the DfE's plan following the Green Paper does is it brings it front and centre. And I think having those 3 stages that I described earlier is a positive step. But what I really want to see is, I want to stop seeing children going into alternative provision in year 7 or year 8 of secondary school and staying there for the remainder of their schooling. Because actually, if they need something else, like Helen's just described, that's absolutely fine, but it should be specialist provision, and it should be named as specialist provision, and it should be correct and right for that child. We shouldn't have children going into AP and sitting there for years and years and years. I also have always been concerned about children's feeling that they've got a sense of identity with the school that they go to, and feeling that they belong. And not feeling that they've been rejected. I mean, we're slightly off topic, but an awful lot of pupils in AP have had either trauma in their lives, or they've felt kind of attachment type issues. And actually, if they're being rejected by education provision after education provision, that just compounds it and makes it harder to start to unpick some of those deep-setted issues that those pupils have. And actually, schools holding them, but holding them in a supported way with correct and appropriate provision, I think is the way forwards for a large number. But 100%, I've worked in specialist provision as well. I agree with Helen. For some people, that is needed.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good landing point for that particular issue. Adam Burt has thrown in artificial intelligence as an issue. And I can see where he's coming from, and it's an interesting one because, of course, increasingly we might see artificial intelligence operating in the sort of marketing, and actually teaching service equipment and so on. So, David, you're obviously thinking about this because you're nodding and smiling about it.
Yes.
What are your thoughts?
Well, we were talking about this yesterday as a trust, actually, because artificial intelligence, the rate of progression is almost exponential. It probably is exponential. So what we were seeing in January is completely different to what we're seeing now. And it's picking up at really some pace. So it's something that every school in the country is going to have to think about and address in the coming months. But as well as I know in the press, there's people like Elon Musk who are signing letters saying we should slow it down, and he's probably right. But I think we should also look at the advantages, particularly from an adaptive technology point of view. One of the few things that I really struggle with my dyslexia even now is I get lost a lot. And actually without sat-navs, I would really be struggling. Now I have an electric car, and trying to get a sat-nav to navigate to an electric car charger would be really tricky without AI. And now I put in where I'm going and it tells me where the charges are along the way. And on its very basic level, actually AI can be supportive of people with disabilities. So let's not be scared of it, but let's be aware of it. In terms of from schools with kids having essays written by bots, well, I'm not quite sure how we deal with that.
Right, how do you want to talk about AI?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm working with a company that does some AI and it's fascinating around reading comprehension. But I want to pick up on the chat GPT type thing. I'm one of my hats, I do a lot of academic research and I'm in a women in academia support network online. And the number of university essays that are chat GPT'd, there are now, and I read this, it was just on the forum the other night, there are now starting to be AI bot thingies that detect chat GPT. There is like a tennis match between the AIs, but actually we're not going to slow it down. Chat GPT can apparently now lie or something like that. But I think this is where training comes in. We need this, the Welsh curriculum around computer science that Tom Crick's pioneered a few years ago is absolutely brilliant because it is getting kids aware of digital literacy. And they're programming, coding is embedded in the Welsh curriculum that's working its way over its at the moment. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So if that were to go away, the rise of the machines may or may not happen. But let's be equipped, let's embrace it and actually get our kids and teachers, everybody, aware of what it's doing, what it's not doing, and how they can contribute or just be with a sort of critical, with a critiquing eye on it. So yeah, I think it's fascinating. And a bit scary, but cool.
Right, thank you. We had two questions from Jana and Alan Thompson. One really about access to information and advice and the problem of charging and membership and so forth. Obviously, all of us would want to disseminate information as best we can, as far as we can, and as easy as we can. Helen, do you think we're doing a good enough job?
I'm just reading the question. So in terms of the BDA, that's a very, I'm co-vice chair of the British Dyslexia Association. So
I'm asking you.
No, I'm just kind of making sense of the question. I'm dyslexic, sorry folks. I think for conferences are expensive to put on. Again, the YSN, the Women in Academies Support Network conference, they're going to do it online. They're looking at about £5,000. But there are loads and loads of WhatsApp groups, forums, Facebook groups, if you're kind of a little old school now. So there are communities that exist. Local dyslexia associations. I know Caroline Folk, I think she's on the call in Wiltshire. She organises things. I turn up and do her talk. There are lots and lots of forums that don't cost. So I would say, hit up your localist association and see what there is, or Google. I know, like I live in Trowbridge, so if I Google Trowbridge SDN, there are a huge number of forums. Every local authority has to have a parent care council. So there are paid for elements, because ultimately, if you are working in a field, our expertise, we work hard for it and we need to pay the mortgage. Most of us also do an awful lot for free, but sometimes there does need to be a cost. But there's a lot of free stuff out there too, and they're not mutually exclusive. It's some of the same people doing it.
Great. There's one question that he also asked, which I'm going to briefly refer to because we're going to move on to the next panel. But of course, prison population is somewhere where difficulties occur, and we should always remember that there are people in that situation which need to be thought about. But I'm not going to extract an answer from you unless you want to go to the specific.
Just one thing very quickly on that. The DfE are currently looking at national standards for each disability, which will help with having standardised EHCPs and standardised process across the country. And I just wonder whether or not that could also support the prison system.
Yeah, okay.
The challenge for prisons, of course, is getting the technology that you need in for incarcerated individuals to be able to use. And if you can get that technology in, so for example, a scanning pen in cell to enable an individual to be able to read their personal information, the impact that then has, if you're in a situation where you can't read, and we know that 70% of the prison population really struggle with literacy, you can make that person far less vulnerable. You can ensure that that person has got access to education and courses to be able to understand the resources and materials that are being provided. But it's this two-pronged problem. Our very hard-working prison officers need the implementation support in the same way that educators need the implementation support to effectively provide the guidance.
Thank you, Julian. You're going to be the next speaker in a minute. So you've done really well there to answer that question pithily. Education, skills and training for levelling up. That's what we're going to talk about now. Before we do, I want to thank our three speakers. Helen, Michelle and David, because they're really great. Michelle's not here to hear that thanks, but we did, I think, signal approval and satisfaction with her comments. But feel free to intervene, David and Helen, if you so desire, going forward.